Good day everyone and welcome to another episode of Vine's Genetics TV. Today we are going to put focus on Quarter 4 Module 3 which deals with Mendel and heredity. So are you ready to learn? For today's video, here are the following objectives that we will be trying to meet. For the most essential learning competency, we are going to predict phenotypic expressions of traits following simple patterns of inheritance. For the specific objectives, we are going to identify and describe the contribution of Mendel and his garden pea in the field of genetics. Yung ikalawa, we are going to try to use the terms genes, allele, dominant, recessive, homozygous, heterozygous, phenotype, and genotype to describe how traits are passed from generations to generation, and apply the laws of heredity in predicting the possible trait of an offspring. And the last one, we are going to try to predict kung ano yung result ng monohybrid and dihybrid genetic process using Punnett Squares. Gentle reminders before proceeding. Feel free to pause the video anytime to soak up the concepts. Pause the video, especially when answering the assessments or activities. You may use separate papers for your answers, or you may download the module provided by the link on the video description. And most important of all, please don't forget to subscribe so that you will be updated for more educational videos. Before proceeding, let's take a look back on the concepts that you have gained from the previous topic. So try to take on the challenge. For the first challenge, what you will do is you are going to try to fill up the missing informations on the given boxes. So saan mo kukunin yung mga sagot? So you can get the answers or the choices from the choices located in this box above. So while answering, you may pause the video and press play to check whether your answer is correct or not. So good luck. So here are the correct answers. So the female gamete is known as the egg, male gamete is known as the sperm. Number of chromosomes is 23. Chromosomes for the sperm is also 23. Next one, this one, the name of the fertilized egg is known as zygote with the number of chromosomes is 46. And the name for this one, for the picture, is an embryo and the number of chromosomes is 46. Did you get it all correct? If so, congratulations. For the next challenge, we are going to try to differentiate or to compare ano ba yung pagkakaiba at pagkakapareho ng mitosis sa meiosis. So, i-compare natin sila based sa kanilang purpose, yung number ng kanilang cell division, ilan yung daughter cell na napoproduce, yung number ng chromosome sa bawat daughter cell, and of course, yung picture. Saan mo kukunin yung mga choices? The choices that can be provided on the boxes are located below. So, just like the first one, you may pause the video while answering. So, here are the correct responses. So, did you get it all correct? So, if so, we are now ready to proceed to our topic for today, which is on Mendelian genetics. It's amazing to imagine that from the 7.9 billion people on Earth, no two individuals are the same. So why do you think so? Bakit kaya walang two person that are the same or magkapareho? So people are different because they inherit different characteristics or known as traits from their parents. So like all babies, yung child carries a unique set of genes, and as we all know from our previous topic, yung kalahati nito comes from the mother and yung kalahati naman comes from the father. So a person's unique characteristics are caused by, of course, the set of genes they inherited from their parents. Another one, the one factor that may affect the characteristics of a person is the environment in which they develop. So in short, it is influenced by nature and nurture. So you might be wondering, what makes us human? So paano ba masasabi ng isang organism ay isang tao? Or paano ba malalaman or magdidetermine ng ating gender, whether it is male or female? So as we all know, based from our previous topic, in all living things, characteristics are passed on in the chromosomes that offspring inherit from their parents. So ibig sabihin, lahat ng human characteristics must be something to do with chromosomes. And can you still remember saan nga ba matatagpuan yung mga chromosomes? Based on our previous topic, we already know na yung mga chromosomes ay matatagpuan sa nucleus of the cell. So as you can see, ito yung itsura ng isang chromosome. So yung chromosome is not visible or it is only visible during cell division, either in mitosis or meiosis, which we have taken up from our previous topic. If we are going to look at this picture, and kahit na sa ating sariling family picture, mapapansin natin that members of the same family often look similar. And maybe you are wondering, bakit nga ba yung mga members of the same family look similar? Or bakit ba magkakamukha yung mga members ng isang pamilya? Now, as we all know, humans, like all organisms, inherit characteristics from their parents. Now, the question is, paano nga ba napapasa yung mga characteristics na to? So, let us proceed so that we will answer this question. Now, to answer the question, it has something to do with heredity. Ano nga ba yung sinasabing heredity? Yung heredity is simply defined as the passing of traits from parents to their offspring either through asexual reproduction or sexual reproduction. So, yung offspring cells of organisms acquire the genetic information from their parents. So, it is also called as inheritance or biological inheritance. We have learned from our previous topic that human body cells contain 46 chromosomes. Now, how many pairs of homologous chromosomes is this? Now, there are 23 pairs of chromosomes. So, yung half nito is taken from your father and yung half naman is taken from your mother, and that would add up to 46 chromosomes. So, you might be thinking, lahat ba ng mga organisms is merong 46 chromosomes? The answer is no. So, titingnan natin, different species have different number of chromosomes. So, if we are going to look at this one, yung fruit fly has only 4 pairs, yung cat has 19 pairs, corn has 10 pairs, and chicken has only 39 pairs. Now, our topic for today revolves around the concepts of genetics. Ano nga ba yung genetics? So, yung genetics ay pag-aaral tungkol sa mga genes and heredity. Kung paano ba yung mga certain qualities or katangian ay naipapasa from parents to offspring as a result of changes in DNA sequence. Now, based on our previous discussions, yung gene is a segment of DNA that contains instructions for building one or more molecule that help the body work. Now, you might be wondering who first explored the realm of genetics. So, yung answer dyan is, it was Gregor Mendel. So, sino nga ba si Gregor Mendel? So, si Gregor Mendel is an Austrian monk, and he is considered to be the father of modern genetics. Now, yung kanyang result are documented patterns sa peas na kanyang pinag-aralan. So, he studied at University of Vienna in 1851, and he worked with pure lines of peas for 8 years. Now, prior sa pag-aaral ni Mendel, yung heredity or yung pagpasa ng characteristic from parents to offspring is considered to be as blending. Yun yung acceptable. Ibig sabihin, combination of the two traits, or yung essentially a dilution of the different parental characteristics, which he later disproved based on the result of his experiment. Gaano nga ba kaimportante yung result ng experiments ni Mendel? So just imagine this one. So over 7 years, nag-experiment si Mendel ng 28,000 pea plants. So bakit nga ba yung pea plants yung kanyang ginamit? And why was it successful? Unang-una, he chose pea plants because it grows quickly or madaling tumubo. And yung pea plants naman are available in pure breeding or homozygous strains. And yung mini pea plant characteristic also shows discontinuous variation. So they either form one form or another with no intermediate. So ibig sabihin na madaling makita yung kanilang mga phenotype. So madaling pag-aralan yung mga pea plants. So kaya yun yung napili niyang subject sa kanyang experiment. So during his experiment, Mendel made 3 key decisions in his experiments. Unang-una, gumamit siya ng purebred plants. Ikalawa naman, meron siyang control ng breeding ng mga pea plants. And yung ikatlo naman is observation of the 7 either-or traits. So ano nga ba yung mga traits na pinag-aralan niya dun sa kanyang mga pea plants? So pinag-aralan niya yung about sa kanyang seed form, whether it is round or wrinkled, yung seed color, whether it would produce yellow or green, yung pod form naman, whether it is inflated or constricted, pod color, whether it will turn green or yellow, yung color ng flower, whether it would form purple or white, the flower position, and lastly, the length of the stem of the pea plant. So you might be wondering, paano nga ba kinontrol ni Mendel yung breeding ng kanyang mga pea plants? So si Mendel, gumamit siya ng pollen to fertilize the selected pea plants. So yung pea generation, or known as the parent generation, is crossed to produce the F1 generation. And to produce naman yung F2 generation, he interrupted the self-pollination process by removing the flower parts, as shown on the picture. So dito, na-ensure niya, nakokontrol niya whether he would cross a homozygous pea plant or a heterozygous pea plant to observe the different type of traits. So ano nga ba yung ginawa ni Mendel during his experiment? So of course, kumuha muna siya ng mga true breeding plants. Ibig sabihin, yung walang halo or homozygous yung kanyang mga traits. So he crossed, for example, true breeding purple flowers, and he crossed it with the true breeding white flower in order to produce the F1 or the first generation. So yung result nito is 100% flower peas. Then, from the F1 generation, he crossed it again to produce the F2 generation or the second generation. And dito, na-observe niya that 75% produced purple flowers, whereas yung 25% naman yung white flowers. So with a ratio of 3:1. During his experiment, Mendel found out that when he crossed plants with different versions of the same trait, or yung P generation, yung F1 generation were not blended versions of the parents as what had been previously accepted. So, yung F1 plants resembled only one of the parents. Kasi dati, yung blended na theory, ibig sabihin pag when you cross the tall plant with a short plant, yung magiging height niya is mediocre or medium size, wherein na-disprove yan based on the experiment of Mendel. So either yung na-inherit na trait is being tall or being short. So either of the two traits coming from the parent. From his experiment, Mendel drew 3 important conclusions. Yung una, that traits are inherited as discrete units. Yung ikalawa naman is that yung mga organisms inherit 2 copies of each gene, 1 from each parent. So yung katlo naman, the 2 copies segregate during gamete formation. So just imagine this one, wala pang knowledge noon si Mendel about DNA, about chromosome, but he was able to understand and to identify ano ba yung mga principles of heredity based on his experiment. And from here, based sa results ng experiment ni Mendel. So we have now the laws of heredity known as law of dominance, law of independent assortment, and the last one is the law of segregation. Now let's proceed with the laws of heredity. After Mendel's experiment, he was able to come up with the laws of heredity, wherein the first one is known as the law of segregation. Ano nga ba yung law of segregation? Law of segregation states that alternate versions of genes, or also known as alleles, causes variation in inherited characteristics. The second one, an organism inherits two alleles for each parent characteristics, one from each parent. So for example, in a pea plant, yung color niya, it is could either yellow or green. And the first law of heredity describes the behavior of chromosomes during meiosis, specifically dun sa anaphase wherein yung homologous chromosomes and chromatids are separated. The second law of heredity is known as the law of dominance. Ano nga ba yung law of dominance? Now, yung law of dominance states that when two different alleles occur together, one of them may be completely expressed. Ibig sabihin yan yung observable or makikita sa isang organism, whereas yung other one is not observable or naitatago. So yung nakikita is known as the dominant alleles. Yung hindi naman nakikita or naitatago is known as the recessive alleles. The trait that was represented in the F1 generation was the dominant trait. So for example, when you cross a tall plant with a dwarf plant, tapos yung lumabas is a tall plant, yung sa F1 generation, so ibig sabihin yung dominant doon is yung trait for being tall, whereas yung recessive naman, yung trait for being dwarf. The third law naman is known as the law of independent assortment. Ano nga ba yung ibig sabihin ng independent assortment? So madali lang. Genes for different characteristics are sorted independently during gamete production. So it states that yung mga alleles of different genes separate independently of one another during gamete formation. So when gametes are formed, the allele for each gene in an individual separate independently of one another. So ibig sabihin, bawat gamete only carry one allele for each inherited trait. So bawat gamete, ibig sabihin, one gamete would be responsible for the color, one gamete would be responsible for the shape, one gamete would be responsible for the texture. So, ganon. So, each gamete controls one trait. This time, let us explore ano nga ba yung impact ng findings ni Mendel in modern times. Now, fast forward to present time, we already know that chromosomes in a homologous pair contains the same type of genes that code for the same characteristics such as eye color. Each chromosome in the pair, however, may have a different version of the gene. And for example, the version of a gene of one chromosome may code for brown eyes, whereas the other version naman may code for blue eyes. So, bawat isang version ng gene is called an allele. There are two types of alleles. Yung pinakauna is known as homozygous alleles. So, paano mo ba malalaman that this is a homozygous allele? So, madali lang. So, if an allele has the same pair or magkapareho, the organism is said to be homozygous for that characteristic. For example, yung sa color of the eyes, it has both allele for brown eyes or it could either have an allele for blue eyes. Now, the second type of allele is known as heterozygous. So, kung kanina magkapareho, ngayon naman, pag magkaiba yung mga allele, is known as heterozygous for that characteristic. So, for example, in the color of the eye, you have one allele for the brown eye and another allele for the blue eyes. Thus, it is known as heterozygous kasi merong dalawang allele for a certain characteristic. It is also important to remember that the phenotype for a particular characteristic depends on which allele is dominant and which allele is recessive. Ano nga uli yung dominant? Yung dominant, as we all know, yan yung na-express or nakikita sa physical appearance of an organism. So usually, in genetics, yung trait for the dominant is being represented by an uppercase. Whereas on the other hand naman, yung recessive, wherein ito are the masked alleles, sila naman are written with a small letter. So in case between the brown eyes and the blue eyes, since yung brown eyes is more dominant, so that is why it is being represented by a big letter, whereas yung recessive trait naman or recessive allele is represented by a small letter. Now, let us go back to our example kanina. We all know that the allele for brown eyes is dominant over the allele for blue eyes. So, what do you think would be the color of an individual who is heterozygous for this eye color? Ibig sabihin, meron siyang allele for brown eyes or meron siyang allele for blue eyes. So, anong magiging kulay ng kanyang mata? So, the color of the eye for this person is, of course, that would be brown. So, ito yung na-express kasi yung brown na trait is dominant over the blue eyes. Based on Mendel's experiment, so he identified the following traits among the pea plants. So, yung mga dominant traits are purple, yung tall, yung yellow, yung round, yung green, yung inflated, and axial. Whereas yung mga recessive traits naman are yung white, yung short, green, wrinkled, yellow, constricted, and yung terminal flower position. Now, here's another example between homozygous and heterozygous. So, for example, we have two big letters here. So, this is known as homozygous round seed. Homozygous kasi magkapareho yung allele niya for being round. As you can see here, another example, big letter R and small letter r. So, this is known as heterozygous kasi meron siyang dominant and recessive. And of course, since dominant yung round, so that is why it's still round seed. So, yun yung may express or makikita sa seeds. And then we have here, homozygous wrinkled seed. So, this one, since pareho siyang recessive, so ito, makikita na ngayon yung karaniwang masked trait against the dominant trait. So, this is known as homozygous wrinkled seed. It is important to remember na pwedeng ma-express yung recessive trait or recessive allele pag both alleles of being recessive are present, as based on the example here. The type of experiment that Mendel carried out investigating just a single characteristic is known as a monohybrid cross. If there are two alleles controlling P shape, this means that there are three possible genotypes that the F2 generation of plants could inherit. So ano nga ba yung three genotypes na yon? So it could either be homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive, or heterozygous. So it could either be smooth, wrinkly, or smooth. So the likelihood of a trait being produced during a monohybrid cross can be mapped out using a Punnett square. Now, let us explore the concepts about Punnett square. Now, you might be wondering, ano nga ba yung purpose of using the Punnett square? Punnett squares is used to illustrate genetic crosses. And based on the picture, Punnett square is a grid system for predicting all possible genotypes resulting from a cross. Yung axis represents the possible gametes for each parent. Yung boxes naman shows the possible genotypes of the offspring. So, yung Punnett square also yields the ratio of possible genotypes and phenotypes. So, dito ilalagay yung mga gametes of the parents either from the male and the female. And this one would be now the genotypes of the offspring after the cross. So, ano nga ba yung steps sa paggawa ng Punnett square? Unang-una, we would represent alleles as letter. And based from our previous discussion, we are going to write the big letter for the dominant trait and small letter naman for the recessive trait. Now, through breeding, for example, in this case, yung purple flower piece would be written as big letter, both big letter P kasi homozygous siya. Yung mga true breeding white flower naman in this case are both small letter P's kasi pareho silang recessive trait or homozygous recessive. Now, suppose we would try to cross two heterozygous purple flower, or ibig sabihin heterozygous meaning it's not pure na purple yung flower, ibig sabihin meron siyang recessive trait for having a white flower trait. So unang-una, isusulat mo yung mga alleles for the male. So first letter here, second letter goes here, and then sa female naman, first letter here, and the second letter will also be written here. So madali lang yung gagawin. So you are just going to combine these letters para malaman yung phenotype at genotype ng kanyang mga offspring. So parehong big letter, so would result homozygous na purple flower. Then next one, small letter P and the big letter P, so it would produce this one. Big letter P and small letter P, and another cross for this one. Both small letter would produce homozygous recessive. So yung result from this one, purple flower, and another is yung pang last is white flower. Now, if we are going to take a look at the result sa kanyang genotype percentage, so yung pure na purple flower is 25%, yung heterozygous naman na purple flower is 50%, yung white flower naman is 25%. So yung phenotype niya is 75% purple flower and 25% white flower. Using also the Punnett square, we can also calculate the genotypic ratio and the phenotypic ratio. So paano nga ba yung pagkuha ng genotypic ratio? Sa pagkuha lang ng homozygous dominant with the heterozygous and the homozygous recessive. Yung sa phenotypic ratio naman, kukunin mo lang yung kanyang dominant appearance and you are going to have it against the recessive appearance. So for example, base kanina, ito yung mga percentage, 25%, 50%, yung 25%. So, ibig sabihin, yung ating genotypic ratio is 1:2:1. Ibig sabihin, 1 homozygous purple flower, 2 heterozygous purple flower, and 1 homozygous white flower. Yung phenotypic ratio naman niya is 75% and 25%. So, this is 3:1. Ibig sabihin, tatlong purple flower into 1 white flower. Aside from monohybrid cross, when you want to know the probability of genetic outcomes for two traits, so for example, you want to cross a wrinkled green piece with a round yellow piece, then you are now going to use the dihybrid cross. Here are the steps to completing a dihybrid cross. Now, kagaya ng sa monohybrid cross, kailangan mo munang ma-identify kung ano ba yung mga alleles. Identify mo kung ano yung recessive and alin yung dominant. Yung mga dominant traits should be written in capital. So, in this case, yung dominant trait is yung yellow. So, that is why it is being represented by a capital Y. Yung recessive trait naman for being green is written with a small letter Y. Same goes with round and wrinkled. Yung step 2 naman, we are going to use the mnemonics which is yung foil. Ano nga ba ibig sabihin ng foil? Yung first, outer, and then yung inner, at saka yung last. Unlike sa monohybrid cross na meron lang tayong dalawa na gametes for each parent, kayo naman meron tayong 4. So, paano ba natin nakuha itong mga alleles na to? Una muna, this one yung first, combine with the second trait to have this one. Then another one for the first with the outer para makuha ito. Next naman, itong small letter Y combine with the allele for big letter R to have this one. And small letter Y with the small letter R to have this one. So same goes with the female allele. Now, once that's done, once na na-establish mo yung mga gametes for each of the parent, you are now going to draw your box which is consist of 16 squares of dihybrid. So, sobrang dami. You are going to label the possible male gametes and label the possible female gametes, and you are now going to plug and chug. Ibig sabihin, you are just going to combine the two gametes coming from the parent. So, ilalagay mo yung mga gametes from the male and yung gametes coming from the female, and then you are now going to slowly combine. Okay, so for the first combination, both big letter Y to have this one, big letter R to have this one. So you are going to do the same with the other boxes. Okay, so with this, we can have these results. Now, let's take another look at a dihybrid cross. So, una, true breeding yellow round piece with a true breeding green wrinkled piece. So, of course, yung F1 generation, 100% ilalabas niyan talaga yung dominant traits, wherein yung yellow at saka yung round. However, since merong nakatago or may mga recessive traits, it would be expressed now on the F2 or the second generation. Okay, so after self-pollination, in a dihybrid cross, it would result into 9:3:3:1. Ibig sabihin, 9 yung yellow round piece, 3 yung red ground piece, 3 yung yellow wrinkled piece, and isa yung green wrinkled piece with this ratio 9:3:3:1 in a dihybrid cross. This time, let us check how much you have learned from the video by taking on the following activities. Feel free to pause the video while answering, and the answers from the given activities are located at the end of the video. So, good luck. For activity 1, you are going to match the keywords to the correct description. Feel free to pause the video while answering, and you may check whether you got it all correct at the end of the video. For activity number 2, you are going to read and complete the sentences. So you are going to choose from the choices here, being represented by the picture. Activity number 3 anchors on the results of Mendel's experiment. So yung gagawin mo lang is to identify kung whether itong mga traits na to is dominant or recessive. So just like the previous activities, feel free to pause the video while answering. For activity number 4, you are just going to determine whether yung allele combination ba niya or yung genotypes is homozygous or heterozygous. You may use the picture as a reference. For activity number 5, you are just going to write yung phenotype based on the following genotypes. Now, let us use number 1 as an example. Since this is homozygous and R is being represented by a round seed, so this one, number 1, is round. Yung phenotype of this seed is round. For activity 6, you are tasked to solve the given problem. A homozygous round-seeded plant, represented by these letters, capital letter R, is crossed with a homozygous wrinkled-seeded plant. So you are tasked to determine the phenotypic and genotypic ratio of their offspring. For activity number 7, what you will do is you are going to cross a heterozygous green-colored pod with a yellow-colored pod. So just like activity number 6, you are going to identify the genotypic and phenotypic ratio by filling up the boxes here using a monohybrid cross. For activity number 8, you are going to complete the Punnett square and find the phenotype ratio. After accomplishing all of those activities, now let us try to assess how much you have learned from today's lesson. For assessment 1, you are going to match the keywords to the correct description. Assessment 2 consists of 3 parts. Yung first one, you are going to identify the phenotypes based on the picture. And then the other one, you are going to identify whether the given alleles are homozygous or heterozygous. And of course, looking at the chart, you are going to identify the genotype based on the description. So feel free to pause the video while answering. For assessment number 3, you are going to answer the questions 1 to 7 using the Punnett square as your example. For assessment number 4, what you will do is you are going to draw a Punnett square for each of the gene crosses listed below. Then you are going to list the offspring's genotypes. For assessment 5, what you will do is you are going to fill in the missing blank to complete Mendel's P-plant experiment. For the first 3, you are going to choose between P1, F2, and F1 as your choices. And for the last assessment, what you will do is you are going to first identify the gametes of the parents, and then using now the gametes, you are going to perform a dihybrid cross in order for you to determine the phenotypes of the offsprings. Now that you have successfully accomplished all those activities and assessments, this time, let's take on more challenges by answering all those enrichment activities. So are you ready? Now, for the first enrichment exercises, what you will do is to find a solution to the problem. Alex has 2 pets, and he was amazed that one of the offspring was an albino. Now, your task is to find a solution or to find an answer as to how an albino came up from his 2 pets by using now the Punnett square. For the second enrichment exercise, what you will do is you are going to find the genotypic ratio as well as its phenotypic ratio when 2 cats, one has a long hair while the other one has a hybrid short hair, and to find out the ratio between the offsprings. For the last enrichment exercise, your task is to identify what are the chances that their offspring will have albino children if both parents have albino genes. So feel free to pause the video and you may check the correct answers at the end of the video. So good luck. Now here are the answers key from the given activities, assessments, and enrichment exercises. That's it for today's video. I hope you have learned and have fun. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and ring the bell for you to be updated for the upcoming videos. Einsteinatics out!